Welcome to Teleforum, a podcast of the Federalist Society's practice groups. I'm Dean Reuter, Vice President, General Counsel, and Director of Practice Groups at the Federalist Society. For exclusive access to live recordings of practice group Teleforum calls, become a Federalist Society member today at fedsoc.org.
Welcome to the Federalist Society's Teleforum conference call. This afternoon, June 16th, we discuss OFCCP in the Biden administration. My name is Guy DeSanctis, and I'm Assistant Director of Practice Groups at the Federalist Society. As always, please note that all expressions of opinion are those of the expert on today's call. Today, we are fortunate to have with us Lauren B. Hicks of Counsel, Ogletree, Deakins, Nash, Smoak, and Stewart, PC. After our speaker gives her opening remarks, we will turn to you, the audience, for questions, so be thinking of those as we go along and have them in mind for when we get to that portion of the call. With that, thank you for being with us today. Lauren, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Lauren Hicks with Ogletree Deakins, and we have a short time here today, so I'm going to get through as many things as we can because there is much to anticipate in the Biden administration. Briefly, as background, I actually worked for OFCCP for about 7.5 years. And for the last about 3.5 years, I've been working on the contractor side, assisting with navigating the many obligations that federal contractors have. And so I want to talk today about sort of the transition from the Trump administration to the Biden administration and some of the things we've already seen that may be changing and some things that we anticipate that will change as we move forward in this administration. So first, I think everyone on the phone is probably generally aware that OFCCP has a new director, Jenny Yang, who has very good experience in her background with EEOC. She's very, very competent, very highly skilled in this area. So this is not new to her, right? That's a little bit of a change from what we've had in the past several directors. We're sort of walking in with a little bit less direct experience in this practice area. She has quite a bit of past experience in related areas of EEO. So I anticipate that she will, from a legal standpoint, have a little bit of an easier time transitioning to the program and begin to roll out her policy initiatives. She hasn't rolled out much yet. She's so far been pretty quiet, but I would expect that to change, right? I think just sort of getting a handle on things. It's a new agency. It's a little bit of a difficult agency to get a handle on from an internal perspective. And so I do, it's not surprising to me that we haven't seen anything happen in a flash, but I do expect some things to move forward. And that being said, she was in place very quickly. I heard that she was, there working with the Department of Labor on Inauguration Day. So that in and of itself is pretty unusual, right? To roll in successfully that quickly and get somebody off the ground and running. Typically speaking, a small agency like OFCCP, it takes many months to have someone in place. Not so, right? And I think everyone should take that as a pretty clear signal from the Biden administration that the mission of this agency is absolutely one of its areas of focus. So what changes are we seeing from the last administration, and what are we expecting to see going forward? Well, so far, I don't think we're seeing a lot of substantive audit changes. We'll come back to that. We have seen a little bit of action as far as their messaging changes and sort of unrolling a little bit of the Trump administration initiatives, right? For example, I'm sure most of you on the phone recall that towards the end of the Trump administration, there was Executive Order 13950, which was sort of was an anti-diversity type training, anti-unconscious bias, well, not specifically unconscious bias, but it had, it was targeted to sort of unwind some particular types of trainings that the administration didn't like. It was rather controversial. The business community at large sort of came out against it. And so that was rolled back quite immediately. And we'll come back to this topic actually as we talk about what we may see from this administration with Director Yang and Marty Walsh, what they may have going forward. So we're seeing some rollbacks of things like that. There's some formal regulatory changes that they've signaled either verbally or maybe in their recent budget proposal, of things that they would like to roll back as well, that maybe they haven't taken actual steps yet, but we do expect some additional things to roll back or to change related to religious exemptions, the PDN sort of transparency modeling that was set forward in the last administration. So expect more of that sort of just generic rollback based on the previous administration. Not a big surprise, pretty typical from administration to administration. On the more pragmatic side, though, with the audits, I think people are a little bit more surprised to hear that we're really not seeing so far a lot of change. And I think basically this is just my personal opinion, but my opinion on that is we didn't actually see that much change in the audits under the Trump administration either, right? They really sort of continued the way the Obama administration was running its audits. They, yes, had some high-level policy changes, but I think those were mostly, to sort of connect with or try to seem friendlier to the business community. But from a pragmatic standpoint, the audits themselves really weren't operating in a materially different way. I think the biggest difference was that towards the end of the administration, they started doing focused audits. And I don't know if anyone on the phone had the pleasure of going through those, but that was where they focused on a specific area of the law and didn't really do the whole full-scale audit that we typically see when they come in, under a compliance review. Well, again, that's another thing the Biden administration has already signaled that it is done with. It removed some from its scheduling list that remains out there, and then it has indicated in its proposed budgeting that it doesn't seem to intend to resume those. Why, you ask? Well, they didn't get them any wins, right? To the agency, they like to see discrimination dollars as really how they measure their success. It's not the only way, but it's, I think, in my opinion, their primary measure of success. Also, maybe technical violations, things like that. And these focused reviews just were not bringing that for them. So in other words, they didn't have any teeth. They weren't creating a lot of flash. So I think the focused reviews are probably gone. And we can anticipate not seeing a lot of that going forward. But as far as the full audits, the full reviews, those were operating in basically the same manner through the Trump administration that they were in the Obama administration. And I had, a client recently sort of feel like the sky was falling because, for example, if you practice in this area, you know that a hot area for the agency has been and will continue to be compensation. And in a particular audit, the agency was running sort of whole workforce analysis on compensation. And, the client was in a panic saying, well, look what this administration is doing. But that's been going on, right? That was going on under Obama. That's been going on under Trump. In other words, if you're not as familiar with how that works, oftentimes we on the business side would like to break the pay analysis groupings. You may call them a variety of things, but the groups that we're looking at for compensation purposes, we would like to drive them smaller and more granular and more, tied together for, using legitimate, relevant criteria. The agency likes to keep it very broad, and they've been doing that now for this administration and the last two. That's not going to change. That's not to say they've been successful with that. That's not to say it's the most legally meaningful analysis. I wouldn't, make any of those suggestions. But from a practical standpoint, are they going to run them in the audits? Yes, they are. I think they will keep running them in the audit. So for you all on the phone, if you know that you are on the scheduling list or you come out in the next scheduling list, which, by the way, I believe will be around July. Certainly expecting a new scheduling list in pretty short order. I know many offices are completely out of cases at this point, so that's usually the time they try and issue a new list. If you're on that list, I'm sure you're used to prepping for these well, but certainly anticipate that there will be continued heavy focus on compensation, though, again, I don't think that's any change from what we've been seeing the last several years. And other than that, the audits are functionally moving the same, the same way. No big surprises in the audits. One of the more frequent questions that I get asked is, why are the audits so slow? They've continued to be slow. I think under the last administration, they were slow. They're going to keep being slow under the Biden administration. That's just sort of the way it is. They may have sped up a little bit in the last administration, particularly because of those focused reviews, which I think they were able to get through a little faster. But for the most part, there's a lot of reasons. We could have a whole separate call on why the audits go very slowly. But for your purposes, just know that it's incentives right within the agency. There's not a lot of incentives to move cases to closure, with a lot of great speed. So that's not something they focus on. I think it will probably continue to be that way under the Biden administration. So expect that when you get an audit, it's going to drag on for a substantial length of time would be my expectation. And that, you may see them start to dig a little bit deeper on some of the more technical things than perhaps they were doing under the Trump administration. Beyond the audit, I think a big question that's hanging out there with the audits is what can we expect as far as enforcement? Now, I don't think the audits changed substantially under the Trump administration, but one thing that was substantially different was they did not pursue a significant amount of enforcement litigation, right? They only filed a handful of cases in the entire Trump administration, although there were some hanging out there from the Obama administration that they did move forward. What can we anticipate? I think unquestionably, we will go back to seeing more litigation from the agency. I think that's unquestionably going to happen. There has been some discussion, and I think it's an interesting question. The amount of settlements wasn't really down at all in the last administration. So I think there's some allegation, right, that maybe because of the way the audits were handled, or maybe the way the settlement negotiations were handled, something like that, contractors may have been actually more willing to settle under the last administration. I don't know if that's true. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And there's some suggestion that that's part of the reason there was not a lot of litigation. Perhaps that's true. I would expect the agency to go back to taking a little bit tougher stance. If you do find yourself in a situation where they've issued a predetermination notice, or a PDN as they call it, or a notice of violations, right? Back to maybe the Obama era policies where they will only accept make whole relief and they won't budge off of that, as they see it, whatever they calculate that amount to be. And they won't sort of budge from that stance. So potentially more litigation for that reason as well. I don't know what to anticipate. One significant area of unknown there, no one on the phone will probably be surprised to hear, is compensation. So compensation has been, sort of the bane of existence to both the contractors and to OFCCP, I think, over the last decade. The agency believes that there is, significant pay gap that's based on, research, variety of things, and that they have not been able to successfully target it. And they're sort of experts at the high level, which is largely run still by Bob Lajeunesse, if you're familiar with him. Maybe you've heard him speak at something like DNI or had a case where you've worked with him. But, they really believe in sort of broad-based compensation analysis rather than cohort or smaller, similarly situated type analysis. They really like the bigger numbers, bigger reviews, and reasonable minds can go back and forth, I guess, on them pushing that. But I think it's worthy of noting, right, that, In the last administration, the agency had a couple of very significant legal losses in the realm of compensation with Analogic and Oracle. And so I think it's a big unknown, right? We don't yet know what they're going to do moving forward. Is it just more of the same? Are they going to keep sort of filing the same thing? Or are they going to start maybe doing some more granular type analyses? And we just don't know. Compensation is incredibly legally difficult. And without boring you with all the details, it's incredibly difficult for them also from an internal standpoint. There's a multitude of reasons for that. It crosses over the investigatory skills, to the legal skills, to the statistical skills, and just sort of separations of skill sets and a lot of other things, plus the time and resources, right? Compensation, unlike hiring, which happens in a very small period of time with a defined set of decision makers, generally speaking, over a concrete period, compensation, as we all know, is just significantly more complex. It goes back over much longer and varied time periods and has more varied factors. And for this reason, it's just difficult for them to do a really meaningful, thorough legal investigation. It continues to be a little bit of a challenge for them. So I'm not sure what we can expect from them going forward as far as whether they will try and tailor those a little bit more narrowly, if they're going to, or maybe they're going to say, no, we still think we're right. And I've heard them take that position just for what it's worth. I do know that they have held the position that those are just non-binding. There were some minor things they can work around, and they can continue on their path of trying to do these very broad analyses. So I'm not sure what to anticipate moving forward, but that's certainly going to be an area for us to watch. It's worth noting that the Biden administration just put out its proposal, right? This is not in place, but its proposal for budget for next year. And probably everyone on the phone is generally familiar, but it's worth noting that these rarely happen the way the administration asks for them, right? And certainly, I don't know that under the current situation with Congress that we would expect that. But it is, I think, very important to note that they asked for a 33% increase in the agency's budget. That's massive. I'm not even sure that we can adequately cover how significant that would be, right, if they actually got that. Now, they won't, I don't think. But it's important to note that, again, the Biden administration is placing very high emphasis on the priorities of this civil rights agency. They believe in the mission, and they're not going to sort of sideline this just because it's a small agency. What do we expect realistically to happen? I don't know. Certainly, they are going to prioritize headcount. They've made that clear in their proposed budget. If you've done a little bit of research on Jenny Yang, she had the same philosophy at EEOC that they needed to increase their headcount as well to be effective. And frankly, right now, OFCCP's headcount is very, very small. It's one of the many, many reasons that your compliance reviews are moving very slowly. They just have very few people. They've shrunk and shrunk and shrunk for the better part of a decade now. So them staffing back up is not really surprising. I think what is an area to watch is how much do they staff up and sort of where are they allocating those resources? Frankly, I think both the Obama administration and the Trump administration, in my opinion, overly prioritized adding administrative type folks in DC. And, they really did not emphasize adding the caseworkers or the compliance officers who are out in the field and doing the actual audit work. And so it will be a really interesting area to watch to see whether this administration changes course a little bit and actually begins to staff the folks doing the casework, or if they just sort of continue to staff more administrative type folks in DC. Something to keep an eye on. What else do we know about their priorities? Well, we are expecting something to come on what they call the Affirmative Action Verification Initiative. Now, that wasn't a new thing under the Biden administration, right? That's actually been brewing for quite some time. It was It was an initiative that was born out of a GAO audit that at least took place. I don't remember when the findings came out, if it was under Trump or Obama, but the investigation by GAO took place in the Obama administration, and they made some recommendations that the agency needed to change several things. And one of them has been this nagging issue for the agency that it only audits a very minuscule number of federal contractors annually. And I'm sure if you all were not on mute, someone would immediately chime in with why does it audit the exact same ones over and over again? Again, I think that's a legitimate concern both inside the agency and out. But regardless, they audit this very tiny number of federal contractors each year. And everyone agrees that they would like the agency to be more impactful. It's not very impactful because of its, sort of small reach. And so one of the solutions that it has put forward is under, the last administration, they said, okay, well, we're going to propose this affirmative action verification initiative, wherein we will require some type of annual certification by the contractors that they've completed, their affirmative action obligations. Now, contractors should be making that certification annually, in essence anyway, in SAM.gov, just for larger federal contracting issues. But we don't know exactly what form this is going to take or what it's going to look like. It could be a whole lot of, not much, just a quick little report. On the other hand, it could be somewhat substantial, just depending on what they require. For example, there are maybe contractors out there who take the position that only one or two locations or entities are federal contractors, and perhaps the report has to be filed by the parent. And I'm making this up entirely. This is a complete hypothetical. But maybe they say, okay, you have to file by the parent, and you have to certify each facility that you have and whether or not it is specifically in compliance, right? So it could force some hands there. I can imagine various scenarios like that where it could be a little bit of a challenge. The bigger issue is that the agency intends in the long run, we'll see if it happens, but the intent of the agency in the long run is that contractors would file their actual AAPs and maybe data with the agency annually. Now, they're, I think, a long way away from that. I don't know definitively, but that's a big technology leap for them. Just to get an annual certification is a big technology leap for them. And by the way, if I have any construction contractor friends on the phone, they're trying to implement basically the same thing with construction, or a similar type program with construction, so that there are some types of more awareness and more certifications required in that lane as well. And while I'm mentioning construction, I will just say, back to the budget very briefly, construction seemed to have played a large role in their budgeting request. And so if I do have construction contractor friends on the phone, it sounds like the agency is finally going to pick back up that lane that they've sort of dropped to the side for the last few years after they had some legal challenges with the way their scheduling was conducted. But anyway, the verification initiative, in the long run, I think the agency's goal is to collect those AAPs. I personally would be very shocked if the agency had the technology, rolling at the minute to be able to do that. That's a big technology leap for them. But it's an area to watch. That's something that was proposed under the Trump administration. And since the Biden administration has been in, they did put up a little web page that says AAP verification initiative coming soon, right? And it's, mentioned, and technology seems to be mentioned in the budget. So it's clearly an initiative they're moving forward with. And it seems to be only a matter of time as to, when they roll it out. And we'll see with more specificity sort of what is required and when. But definitely an area to watch. What initiatives can we anticipate from this administration? Well, I think if you put into perspective the current sort of status of American culture, the significance of post George Floyd, BLM, post Me Too, all the cultural things that have happened in the last handful of years. I think that this administration is going to try and see where they can possibly expand some, what I will call a little bit more DNI type initiatives. The regulations are, I think, kind of the bare minimum, right? They're very burdensome to comply with, but they don't, they don't sort of get into the things that we really think about now in the DEI context to sort of bring about more equity, more inclusion, those types of things. So it would not surprise me in the slightest, and this is sort of what I'm anticipating, if this administration doesn't focus on moving in that direction. So you think I think maybe in a very simplistic item, for example, is something exactly the opposite of Executive Order 13950, right? So we had Executive Order 13950, the Combating Race and Sex Stereotyping Initiative under the Trump administration that's now deceased. But I could see this administration going in the opposite direction and saying, no, federal contractors, we want to mandate more training, or we want to mandate a specific type of training. Maybe it's an unconscious bias training. It could be something different, right? So that's just my speculation, but I think it's a quite reasonable speculation. And then, I do think because of Jenny Yang's background, and again, this is just my speculation, I think we're going to see an administration that is probably more regulatory focused versus, sort of just compliance and or continued enforcement focused. So I think she will consider ways to be impactful. And if she thinks she can pass some regulations to expand in either, DEI areas like I was just discussing, or to give some of the regulations a little bit more teeth, because of course there's always a nagging issue within the agency of maybe there being lack of teeth in some of them. I think she'll do that, right? So I think it wouldn't surprise me if that weren't what they were sort of focused on and working towards, bigger, more significant things in addition to just, moving the enforcement forward. On the enforcement, I would make a really quick note that knowing how the agency works, it takes many years to build up discrimination cases. And I think the Trump administration cleared out most of the pipeline. So don't be surprised if this year rolls through and by the end of this year, the discrimination dollars are way down, right? That you should not take that as any type of indication, however, that the agency is going more lax or that they are not going to enforce, things like that. I think quite the opposite, but just understanding that these cases take many years to develop. And so there's going to be a lag, because I do think, and I don't know, I mean, obviously I don't have access, but from what I do know in my practice, things like that, I suspect that the pipeline is probably down. I think they settled so many cases that there's probably not a lot left hanging out there for this administration to come in and sort of knock off and get some dollar wins as they might see it. So, I expect that this year may be a little quieter on the dollar front, but you should not take that as a signal of anything whatsoever, other than just a practical signal. Other quick sort of high-level things regarding the audits. Right now, the offices, OFCCP offices, I should say, are still operating virtually, which means if you have one of those cases that requires an on-site, or the agency elects to do an on-site, they're still conducting those virtually, which have been pretty, in my opinion, pretty fluid, pretty harmless. They're significantly less burdensome, I think, than doing real on-site. How long can we anticipate that to continue? I don't think we know the answer to that question. The agency is still not back. It doesn't seem to be in any rush to get its employees back. So I think for now, we can anticipate continued sort of virtual on-sites. In addition to that, of course, they're not going to be doing these focused reviews, so there just won't be as many reviews that require an on-site period going forward. And I think they've perfected, right? I think they realized that some of the things that they felt they had to go on-site for, they were able to obtain just as successfully, virtually. Other audit issues, like they've been giving us, since COVID hit, much more generous timeframes to submit the desk audit and other things. So far, that seems to be continuing. Obviously, I don't think it'll go on forever, but I'm surprised it's gone on, frankly, as long as it has. So, don't be shocked if and when we start seeing those timeframes tighten back up and you have to get your desk audits together a little bit faster. I would say don't be lulled into a sense of, security, that you'll have a lot of time to get things prepared. But they've continued. I just want to know, the agency has continued to be very gracious and flexible with timeframes as a general rule. The agency has already taken initiatives to sort of backtrack on contractor compliance efforts. Probably if you're on the phone, you probably don't need a lot of compliance assistance from the agency, but it's something that they had done more of in the last administration, and we tend to see a little bit more of in Republican administrations. And now they've already backed off that, closed some portals that were available, so on and so forth. So I think, they're going to continue to be quiet on that front. It'll be interesting to see how much they start to participate in engagement with the community, right? They were very engaged with the community in the last administration, the business community. I would expect to pivot back towards more Obama-era policies where they try to engage more directly with the worker communities, try and drum up more complaints coming into OFCCP. Occasionally, I'll just make a quick note. Probably, again, everyone on the phone understands this. But OFCCP, in addition to its audits or compliance reviews, it can handle complaints from workers, just like EEOC. Although they're significantly worse than EEOC complaints, in my opinion, because they mandate an on-site. So they are just going to be significantly more burdensome as a general rule than if the same person had filed with EEOC. They only handle a small number of those a year because OFCCP is not well known to workers, right? Average person has never heard of OFCCP, so they just don't get the same volume of complaints that EEOC gets. But nonetheless, I think we'll see in this administration, like we saw in the Obama administration, the agency really likes complaints and likes being a resource for workers. And so it will not surprise me if they do more worker outreach to try and increase their number of complaints. And, I don't know that we're going to see any action on this. So I'm not trying to, stir up anyone to be concerned at this particular moment. The sky is not falling. But if, as a practitioner in this area, my biggest area of focus, or what I'm thinking about, things that could happen going forward, in addition to the AAP verification initiative, which could be, very basic or could be highly burdensome depending on what gets implemented in the future. But the other thing I continue to think about a lot is, pay reporting. Will the agency come up with some kind of pay reporting, maybe to parallel what we saw previously on the EEO1 component 2? Or could they even push for something more dramatic, right? I can see a progressive administration saying, no, look, that sort of wasn't going to be very effective anyway. We want to do more detailed reporting, or we want to require something more significant. Could it be some more pay transparency? I don't know, but I think it's an area to watch. And I think, everyone who's in this area should continue to be very diligent in your, sort of compensation practices and your equity analyses, and making sure you're really staying on top of those, because there's just no question that this administration will continue to focus on those things. And, the states are continuing to add on, piling on as we move along through the years. So just an area to watch. And with that, I think I'm going to stop talking and open it up for questions.
Thank you for that. We'll now go to audience questions. In the meantime, I guess one question to start us off. If we're able to tell, or are we able to tell what the agency's enforcement priorities are based on the newly released proposed budget in the Biden administration?
Yes, I think a little bit. I think some of the budget, as well as other initiatives they've already rolled out, signal to me that they are likely to try and push jurisdictional-based issues. We haven't seen much of that for several years. And again, the agency has continued to plague and perplex them that there are sort of contractors out there that they know are flying under the radar, either because they don't identify as a federal contractor on the EEO-1s or they're only a subcontractor. There's a multitude of reasons that this happens. But I do expect that, with all the resources they're trying to build up, that they will try and target some more jurisdictional type issues. We may see them, trying to get back into various healthcare type issues. So I think we will see more jurisdictionally, and then probably continued push for compensation would be the other one. Where they head, which is a big unknown at this moment, I think, but which direction they head in compensation.
Thank you for that answer. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss in the meantime, or anything?
I will just make a note while we're waiting to see if there are any questions that, again, I think a scheduling list is probably imminent, and you should definitely keep an eye out to make sure if you're on the list, and begin prepping those. If you do have one on the list, one or more on the list, prep them immediately. Do not wait. Do not wait for the scheduling letter. Having that notice now is the single best gift I think the agency could have possibly given to business. And so, prepare, start early, and make sure that you're getting things as tight and clean as possible before you make that initial desk audit submission, because it's much, much, much harder, if not impossible, to clean things up on the back end after it's already been submitted to the agency. So yeah, just take advantage of the scheduling list to prepare as diligently as you can.
Thank you for that. It appears that we don't have any more questions. So on behalf of the Federalist Society, I want to thank our expert, Lauren Hicks, for the benefit of her valuable time and expertise today. And I want to thank our audience for calling in and participating. We welcome listener feedback by email at info@fed-soc.org. As always, keep an eye on our website and your emails for announcements about upcoming Teleforum calls and virtual events. Thank you all for joining us today. We are adjourned.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Teleforum, a podcast of the Federalist Society's practice groups. For more information about the Federalist Society, the practice groups, and to become a Federalist Society member, please visit our website at fedsoc.org.